The distant whistle of the Pacific and Western locomotive pierced the quiet Arizona afternoon as blood-red dust devils danced across the parched earth. Daniel Hayes tugged at the brim of his weathered Stetson, squinting against the harsh sunlight as he guided his Appaloosa along the railroad tracks. He hadn't planned on taking this route back to his ranch, but something perhaps instinct honed from years on the frontier had pulled him this way today, a decision that would change everything. It was 1878, and the West was still wild, still dangerous, still full of promise and peril in equal measure. Daniel had carved out his place in this unforgiving land through grit and determination, transforming a patch of Arizona territory into the modest but thriving Sagebrush Ranch. At 32, he'd survived drought, Apache raids, and the kinds of men who sought to take what wasn't theirs by force. But nothing in those hard years had prepared him for what he spotted ahead, crumpled beside the iron rails that sliced through the wilderness. At first he thought it might be a discarded bundle of cloth, perhaps fallen from a passing train. But as he drew closer, the shape became unmistakably human, a woman, lying motionless beside the tracks. Daniel dismounted in an instant, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that sent a small cloud of dust into the air. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. In these parts, caution wasn't just wise, it was necessary for survival. She lay face down, her dress torn and dirty, golden-brown hair tangled with dust and small desert twigs, no shoes on her feet, which were scratched and bloody. As Daniel knelt beside her, he noticed the bruises forming on her exposed arms and the back of her neck. "Madam." He called softly, reaching to gently turn her over. Her face was scratched, a dark bruise forming along her left cheekbone, but even through the dirt and injuries, Daniel could see she was beautiful. Young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. To his relief, her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She was alive, her eyes fluttered open, striking green eyes that widened with terror when they focused on him. She tried to scramble away, wincing in pain. "Easy now," Daniel said, keeping his voice low and calm the way he would speak to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you, you're injured." "Where?" Her voice cracked, parched from the desert air. Daniel uncorked his canteen and offered it to her. "Small sips," he advised as she grabbed it with trembling hands. After drinking, she attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. Daniel caught her before she could fall, noticing how she flinched at his touch. "You'll rest now, I promise," he said, supporting her weight. "My ranch isn't far. Let me take you there, get you fixed up." Fear and suspicion flashed in those green eyes. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question in a land where kindness often came with hidden costs. Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Because out here we help folks in need or none of us survive," he said simply. "I've got a housekeeper at the ranch, Mrs. Willoughby. She'll tend to you." The woman studied his face, seemingly searching for deceit. Finally, exhaustion won out over fear. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "There's always a choice, madam. You could stay here and take your chances with the elements and whoever did this to you, or you can trust me, at least until you're back on your feet." A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. "Trust is what got me here in the first place." Before Daniel could respond, she swayed again, her eyes rolling back as consciousness slipped away from her. He caught her limp form, lifting her as carefully as possible onto his horse. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, like a bird with hollow bones. As he mounted behind her, supporting her unconscious body against his chest, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what storm he was riding into. In his experience, a woman in this condition meant trouble following close behind, and in the Arizona territory of 1878, trouble usually came armed and without mercy. The ride to Sagebrush Ranch took nearly an hour, the woman remaining unconscious against him the entire journey. With each passing mile, Daniel found himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see riders in pursuit. But the trail remained empty, the only movement coming from tumbleweeds and the occasional scurrying jackrabbit. The ranch came into view as they crested the final ridge, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn, corral, and bunkhouse. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but out here, it represented years of backbreaking work and stubborn perseverance. His ranch hand, Miguel Vasquez, spotted them approaching and jogged out to meet them, his weathered face creasing with concern as he noticed the woman. "Dios mío, what happened?" Miguel asked, helping Daniel dismount while keeping the woman steady. "Found her by the tracks," Daniel explained, gathering her into his arms. "Get Doc Williams from town and find Mrs. Willoughby." Miguel nodded, already moving toward the stable for a fresh horse as Daniel carried the unconscious woman into the house. He'd barely made it through the door when Mrs. Willoughby appeared, her gray streaked hair escaping its usual tight bun, hands already on her ample hips. "Lord above, what have you brought home now, Daniel Hayes?" the older woman exclaimed, but she was already clearing space on the sofa in the sitting room. "She needs help, Mrs. Willoughby. Found her beat up pretty bad out by the tracks." The housekeeper's expression softened as she took in the young woman's condition. "Poor thing. Bring her to the guest room instead. I'll heat water for washing." Daniel carried her down the hallway to the small but tidy guest room, gently laying her on the quilt-covered bed. In the better light of the house, he could see more clearly the extent of her injuries, scrapes and bruises, a split lip, and angry red marks around her wrists that looked suspiciously like rope burns. Mrs. Willoughby returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. "Out with you now," she shooed Daniel away. "I'll tend to her properly." Daniel hesitated, strangely reluctant to leave. "I sent Miguel for Doc Williams." "Good, now go make yourself useful elsewhere while I clean her up," the housekeeper insisted firmly. On the porch, Daniel paced restlessly, his mind churning with questions. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most concerning, who had done this, and were they looking for her? Doc Williams arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand. "Miguel filled me in on the ride over," the older man said, removing his hat as he entered the house. "Where is she?" Daniel led him to the guest room, where Mrs. Willoughby had cleaned the woman's wounds and changed her into a borrowed nightgown. "She woke briefly," Mrs. Willoughby reported. "Frightened out of her wits, poor thing. Wouldn't tell me her name, then passed out again." The doctor spent nearly 30 minutes examining the unconscious woman, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When he finally emerged, he closed the bedroom door softly behind him. "She's been through hell," Doc Williams said bluntly. "Multiple contusions, exhaustion, dehydration. Those marks on her wrists indicate she was bound for some time. Her feet are in terrible shape, looks like she walked miles without shoes." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Will she recover?" "Physically, yes, with time and care. Mentally," the doctor shrugged. "That depends on what happened to her and how strong she is. Keep her comfortable, get some food and water in her when she wakes. I'll come back tomorrow." After the doctor left, Daniel found himself returning to the guest room. Mrs. Willoughby had placed a chair beside the bed and was sitting guard, dabbing the woman's forehead with a cool cloth. "I'll sit with her," Daniel offered. "You've got dinner to prepare and the men will be coming in from the range soon." The housekeeper gave him a knowing look. "Just remember she's injured and frightened, Mr. Hayes. Don't you go getting any ideas." "Mrs. Willoughby," Daniel felt heat rising to his face. "You know me better than that. I know you're a good man," she conceded, "but I also know it's been lonely for you since Sarah passed." Daniel flinched at the mention of his late wife, gone 3 years now to consumption. "This isn't about that, it's about doing what's right, Mrs. Willoughby patted his arm as she rose from the chair. "Of course it is. I'll bring you both some supper later." Left alone with the mysterious woman, Daniel settled into the chair. In repose, with the dirt and blood washed away, she looked even younger than he'd first thought, perhaps no more than 25. Her honey-brown hair spread across the pillow, and her features, though still marked by bruising, were delicate and well-formed. "Who are you?" he wondered silently. "And what am I getting myself into by helping you?" As if sensing his thoughts, her eyelids fluttered. She shifted restlessly, a small moan escaping her lips. "Easy," Daniel murmured. "You're safe now." Her eyes opened fully, those striking green irises now alert and immediately wary as they fixed on him. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice stronger than before. "Sagebrush Ranch. My home. I'm Daniel Hayes, the man who found you by the tracks." She attempted to sit up, wincing with the effort. Daniel moved to help her, but she recoiled from his outstretched hand. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. Daniel raised both hands in a placating gesture. "I won't, but you need to rest. Doctor's orders." She glanced down at the nightgown she now wore, then back to Daniel with renewed suspicion. "Mrs. Willoughby, my housekeeper, tended to you," he explained quickly. "Your clothes were torn and dirty. She's lending you some things until we can get you proper attire." The woman seemed to relax marginally at this explanation. She looked around the room, taking in her surroundings with careful assessment. "How long have I been unconscious?" she asked. "A few hours. It's nearly sundown now." She nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Hayes, but I can't stay." "I need to. You can't go anywhere in your condition," Daniel interrupted. "Whatever you're running from, you're safe here for now." Something flickered across her face, fear, perhaps, or resignation. "You don't understand. He'll come looking for me." "Who?" She pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. "I can't help you if you won't trust me with at least some information," Daniel said, trying to keep frustration from his voice. For a long moment she stared at him, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. "My name is Eleanor." "Eleanor Kincaid. Miss Kincaid," Daniel acknowledged with a slight nod. "Would you like to tell me what happened to you, or who did this?" Eleanor turned her face away. "I made a terrible mistake, that's all you need to know." "I respect your privacy, Miss Kincaid, but if someone's after you, my ranch hands and I need to be prepared." She looked back at him, her expression hardening. "Why would you risk yourself and your people for a stranger?" It was a question Daniel had been asking himself since he'd first lifted her onto his horse. "I believe in helping those who need it. My father taught me that a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's looking." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Daniel agreed. "Died defending this land from raiders when I was 20. Something in Eleanor's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Willoughby entered carrying a tray with 2 bowls of stew and thick slices of bread. "Ah, you're awake, miss," the housekeeper said approvingly. "Good. You need to eat to get your strength back." Eleanor eyed the food warily, but the aroma of the hearty beef stew seemed to overcome her caution. With trembling hands, she accepted the bowl Mrs. Willoughby offered. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel watched as she took a small spoonful, then another more eagerly. Whatever she'd been through, hunger now outweighed suspicion. "The men are asking about our guest, Mrs. Willoughby said to Daniel. "They're concerned." "Tell them everything's under control," Daniel replied. "I'll speak with them after supper." When Mrs. Willoughby had gone, Eleanor spoke again. "Your ranch hands, how many men work for you?" 5 regular hands, plus Miguel, my foreman, all good men." He studied her face, noting the calculation in her eyes. "Are you counting your odds, Miss Kincaid?" She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Force of habit, Mr. Hayes. Recent events have made me cautious, understandable. But no one here will harm you, you have my word on that." Eleanor took another spoonful of stew, considering him. "Your word means a lot around here, I imagine." "A man's word is all he has out here," Daniel confirmed. "Break it once and folks never trust you again." "And what do you get out of helping me, Mr. Hayes?" she asked suddenly. "Most men want something in return for their kindness." The bluntness of her question took Daniel aback. "I'm not most men, Miss Kincaid. I expect nothing from you except perhaps honesty when you're ready to offer it." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if she'd made some internal decision. "I was traveling on the eastbound train," she began, placing her half-finished bowl aside. "I needed to leave California quickly. I had paid for passage to St. Louis." Daniel remained silent, giving her space to continue her story at her own pace. "There was a man on the train who took an interest in me, Lawrence Thornton. He claimed to be a businessman from Denver." Her voice grew tight. "He was charming, attentive. I was naive enough to be flattered by his attention." Daniel's jaw clenched, already anticipating where this story was heading. "Yesterday, he invited me to join him in the dining car. Eleanor swallowed hard. "I now believe he put something in my drink. When I woke, we were in a small shack somewhere and I was tied to a chair. Did he?" Daniel couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Eleanor's eyes flashed with a spark of defiance. "No, he didn't get the chance. He told me he had business arrangements to make first. Said he had buyers who would pay handsomely for a refined lady like me. Daniel felt sick. Human trafficking wasn't uncommon in the territories, especially with young women lured from the east with promises of marriage or employment. He left me guarded by a younger man, barely more than a boy, really. I managed to convince him to loosen my bonds so I could attend to personal needs. A grim smile crossed her face. When he turned his back, I struck him with a water pitcher and ran. And you've been running ever since, Daniel concluded. Eleanor nodded. I didn't know where I was, just that I needed to get away. I followed the railroad tracks, hoping to reach a town. That's all I remember until I woke up here. The pieces fell into place for Daniel: her injuries, her distrust, her fear. This Thornton, what does he look like? Tall, well-dressed, dark hair graying at the temples, has a scar through his right eyebrow. Eleanor's voice had taken on a mechanical quality, as if distancing herself from the description. He wears an expensive gold pocket watch with an eagle engraved on it. Daniel committed the description to memory. I'll warn my men. If anyone matching that description shows up, we'll be ready. You don't understand, Eleanor said urgently. He's not just some common criminal. He has connections with railroad officials, even some territorial marshals. That's how he operates so openly. This revelation complicated matters significantly. If Thornton truly had law enforcement in his pocket, simply turning Eleanor over to the authorities wouldn't guarantee her safety. All the more reason for you to stay put and recover, Daniel said firmly. We're 20 miles from town here, and strangers stand out. You'll be safer here than trying to run again. Eleanor looked unconvinced. I've put you in danger just by being here. I've faced worse, Daniel assured her, though he wasn't entirely certain that was true. For now, you need rest. We can figure out next steps tomorrow. He rose from the chair, gathering their dishes. Mrs. Willoughby sleeps in the room next door. Call out if you need anything during the night. Mr. Hayes, Eleanor called as he reached the door. He turned back to find her watching him with an unreadable expression. Thank you for everything. I know I haven't given you much reason to trust me. Daniel offered a small smile. Get some rest, Miss Kincaid. Things often look clearer in the morning light. As he closed the door behind him, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that clarity was exactly what they'd need in the coming days, along with a healthy dose of caution, and perhaps more than a little luck. Daniel gathered his ranch hands in the bunkhouse after dinner, informing them of the situation in broad strokes. He described Thornton and instructed them to be vigilant for strangers approaching the property. So we're harboring a fugitive now, boss? Asked Will Cooper, the youngest of his hands at barely 20. We're protecting a woman in danger, Daniel corrected firmly. There's a difference. Miguel, who had been quiet throughout the explanation, finally spoke. I heard rumors in town about girls going missing between California and Colorado. Sheriff mentioned it last month, said the territorial governor was asking for information. This news strengthened Eleanor's story, though Daniel had already decided to believe her. The injuries and fear he'd witnessed couldn't be feigned. Then it's even more important we keep Miss Kincaid safe, Daniel concluded. Double the night watches until further notice, and no one mentions our guest to anyone in town. The men nodded in agreement, their loyalty to Daniel outweighing any reservations they might have had about the potential danger. That night, Daniel found sleep elusive. He paced the length of his bedroom, his mind replaying Eleanor's story, planning what to do next. The territorial marshal's office in Prescott might help if they weren't compromised as Eleanor feared. Perhaps a telegram to his old Army friend now serving as a U.S. Marshal in Denver could provide some verification about Thornton. Just after midnight, a soft knock at his bedroom door startled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Mrs. Willoughby in her dressing gown, looking concerned. She's having nightmares, the housekeeper whispered, crying out something fierce. I tried to wake her, but she seemed more frightened of me than whatever she was dreaming about. Daniel pulled on his shirt. I'll check on her. He found Eleanor thrashing against the sheets, her face contorted in fear even in sleep. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead as she mumbled incoherently, occasionally crying out. Miss Kincaid, he called softly from the doorway, not wanting to startle her. When she didn't respond, he moved closer to the bed. Eleanor, wake up. You're having a nightmare. Her eyes flew open, wild with terror. She lashed out instinctively, her fist connecting with Daniel's jaw before she fully registered who he was. It's me, he said quickly, stepping back to give her space. Daniel Hayes, you're safe at Sagebrush Ranch. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by embarrassment. I hit you, she said, horrified. I'm so sorry. Daniel rubbed his jaw, managing a smile. Good right hook. Remind me not to make you angry. The weak attempt at humor seemed to calm her. Eleanor pushed herself into a sitting position, pulling the blankets around her despite the warm night. Would you like some water? Daniel offered. She nodded, and he poured a glass from the pitcher on the nightstand. As she drank, her hands trembled slightly. Do you want to talk about it? He asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Eleanor stared into the glass. It was just memories, things I'd rather forget. Daniel understood that well enough. He still had nightmares about finding his wife, Sarah, cold and still in their bed after the consumption finally took her. Sometimes he dreamed about the Comanche raid that had claimed his father's life. The West carved its scars deep into everyone who dared to make a life here. Sometimes, he said carefully, carrying memories alone makes them heavier. Eleanor looked up at him, studying his face in the dim lamplight. You speak from experience. It wasn't a question, but Daniel nodded anyway. Lost my wife 3 years ago, consumption. Before that, my father to raiders. Out here, death is never far away. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly. About your wife. Sarah was special, Daniel acknowledged, the familiar ache in his chest whenever he spoke of her. She came west to teach at the schoolhouse in town. Stubborn woman refused my first 2 proposals. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. Smart woman. She claimed I was too serious, needed to learn to laugh more. The memory brought an unexpected warmth. She was right. Eleanor set her glass aside. In my nightmare, I couldn't run fast enough. No matter how hard I tried, he was always right behind me. Daniel wanted to reach out to offer comfort through touch, but knew it would only frighten her. He can't hurt you here, can't he? Eleanor looked toward the window, where moonlight cast silver patterns through the curtains. Men like Thornton don't give up what they consider theirs. And he paid good money for me. The casual way she stated this fact as if her worth could be measured in dollars made Daniel's blood boil. You're not property, Miss Kincaid, no matter what he believes. In this world, Mr. Hayes, women often are, whether legally or practically. There was a bitterness in her voice that suggested personal experience beyond her recent ordeal. Not on my land, Daniel said firmly. Here you're a guest deserving of respect and protection, nothing less. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. You're an unusual man, Daniel Hayes. Just doing what my father and Sarah would expect of me. She seemed to consider this. Tell me about your ranch. How long have you been here? Daniel recognized the request for what it was, a desire to focus on something other than her fears. He obliged, describing how his father had claimed the land after the Mexican-American War, how they'd built the house together, how he'd expanded the operation after inheriting it. As he spoke, Eleanor's eyelids grew heavy, the tension gradually leaving her body. When she finally drifted back to sleep, her face was peaceful, the nightmare apparently banished for now. Daniel quietly rose from the chair, adjusting her blanket before extinguishing the lamp. At the doorway, he paused, looking back at the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Whatever trouble followed Eleanor Kincaid, he was now firmly in its path and surprisingly untroubled by that fact. The next morning brought clear skies and the promise of another scorching Arizona day. Daniel had been up since dawn, checking the property boundaries with Miguel and 2 other hands. They found no sign of intruders, but the vastness of the territory meant someone could approach from nearly any direction. When he returned to the house for breakfast, he found Eleanor seated at the kitchen table, dressed in one of Mrs. Willoughby's spare dresses. The housekeeper's clothes were too large for Eleanor's slender frame, but she'd managed to make adjustments that rendered the outfit wearable, if not fashionable. Good morning, Daniel greeted, removing his hat as he entered. You're looking better. It was true. Though bruises still marked her face, color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were clear and alert. Mrs. Willoughby's cooking has medicinal properties, Eleanor replied with a small smile. I've eaten more at breakfast than I have in days. The housekeeper harumphed from her position at the stove. The girl's half-starved, poor thing, need more meat on those bones. She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Daniel. You too, Mr. Hayes, running yourself ragged before the sun's properly up. Daniel accepted the food gratefully. Any trouble sleeping after I left? He asked Eleanor. She shook her head. No more nightmares, thank you for sitting with me. Mrs. Willoughby glanced between them with raised eyebrows but said nothing as she busied herself with the dishes. I need to ride into town today, Daniel said after a few bites. Get supplies, send some telegrams. I thought perhaps we could find you some proper clothes while we're there. Eleanor stiffened. I'm not sure going into town is wise if Thornton has men looking for me. Holbrook's a small place, but there are enough travelers passing through that you won't stand out if we're careful, Daniel assured her. And I'll be with you the entire time. She still looked uncertain. Why send telegrams? I have a friend in the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver. I want to ask him about Thornton, see if there's an investigation already underway. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. You believe there might be? Miguel mentioned rumors about missing women along the railroad. If your Thornton is behind it, he may already be on the authorities' list. Eleanor considered this. And if he is, what then? Would you turn me over to them? Only if I'm certain they can protect you, Daniel promised. I won't risk your safety. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, trust beginning to take root where suspicion had been. All right, Eleanor finally agreed. I'll go to town with you. 2 hours later, they were in Daniel's wagon heading toward Holbrook. Eleanor wore Mrs. Willoughby's plainest dress with a shawl covering her distinctive hair and a wide-brimmed bonnet shadowing her face. Daniel had insisted she wear a pair of his socks under borrowed boots to protect her still healing feet. The town's grown considerably since the railroad came through, Daniel explained as they approached the settlement. Still small compared to Prescott or Tucson, but we've got the basics: general store, telegraph office, hotel, a couple saloons. Eleanor nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings nervously. And a sheriff, deputy outpost. Sheriff's main office is in Snowflake. Daniel glanced at her. Stick close to me, keep your head down. Anyone asks, you're my cousin from back east, visiting after being recently widowed. Hence the somber clothes and withdrawn demeanor, Eleanor concluded. Clever, Daniel smiled. Mrs. Willoughby's idea, she has a knack for such things. As they entered the town, Daniel felt Eleanor tense beside him. He wanted to reassure her, but knew better than to draw attention by leaning close or speaking privately. Instead, he guided the wagon to the hitching post outside Thompson's general store. We'll start with clothes, he decided, helping her down from the wagon. Martha Thompson has a good selection of ready-mades and she's discreet. The store bell jingled as they entered, and Martha Thompson looked up from her ledger, a smile breaking across her friendly face. Daniel Hayes, haven't seen you in town for nearly 2 weeks. Her curious gaze shifted to Eleanor. Mrs. Thompson, this is my cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Martin, recently widowed and staying with me for a time. Eleanor, this is Martha Thompson, proprietress of the finest establishment in Holbrook. Eleanor offered a subdued nod, playing her part perfectly. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Understanding softened Martha's expression. I'm sorry for your loss, dear. Come, let me show you some appropriate items that might suit you. While the women disappeared behind a curtained area at the rear of the store, Daniel browsed the shelves, gathering supplies he needed for the ranch. He kept one ear tuned to the murmur of female voices, alert for any sign of distress from Eleanor. Your cousin seems quite delicate, Martha commented when she returned to wrap Daniel's purchases. Tragedy affects some harder than others. Daniel nodded gravely. It's been difficult. I'm hoping the Arizona air will restore her spirits. Well, she has excellent taste, despite her circumstances. Martha tallied his items, adding the clothes Eleanor had selected. That'll be $8.42 all told. Daniel paid, then waited by the door for Eleanor, who emerged wearing a simple blue calico dress that fit her properly. Even in such modest attire, she carried herself with an innate grace that drew the eye. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Thompson, Eleanor said softly. Outside, Daniel loaded their purchases into the wagon. The telegraph office is next, then we'll stop for lunch at the hotel dining room before heading back. The telegraph operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, barely glanced up as they entered. Daniel drafted 2 messages, one to his friend in Denver, another to the territorial marshal in Prescott, both making discreet inquiries about Lawrence Thornton without mentioning Eleanor directly. Responses might take a day or 2, the operator informed him, counting out the words to calculate the cost. I'll check when I'm next in town, Daniel replied, paying the fee. Thank you. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Eleanor suddenly gripped Daniel's arm, her fingernails digging through his shirt sleeve. What is it? He asked quietly, following her gaze. Across the street, a man was tying his horse outside the saloon, tall, well-dressed, with a distinctive flash of silver at his waistcoat where a pocket watch might hang. Is that him? Daniel whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Eleanor shook her head slightly. No, but he's one of Thornton's men. I saw him at the shack. He's the one who guarded me. Daniel's mind raced. They needed to leave town immediately, but walking briskly to the wagon would draw attention. Moving casually while the man might turn and see Eleanor at any moment seemed equally dangerous. Keep your face down, Daniel instructed. We'll walk to the hotel as planned. If he enters the saloon before we reach it, we'll double back to the wagon. They set off at a measured pace, Eleanor clutching Daniel's arm as if for support, a widow leaning on her cousin's strength, to any observer. Daniel kept his expression neutral while scanning the street for any other potential threats. The man finished securing his horse and paused, looking up and down the street as if searching for something or someone. Daniel felt Eleanor's grip tighten further. Just as they reached the hotel steps, the man turned in their direction. Daniel smoothly pivoted, placing his body between Eleanor and the man's line of sight, using the pretext of helping her up the steps to shield her face. They made it inside without incident, but Daniel's heart was pounding. The dining room was mercifully busy with the lunch crowd, and he guided Eleanor to a corner table with her back to the wall. Do you think he saw us? Eleanor whispered once they were seated. I don't believe so, but we can't stay long. Daniel signaled a waiter. We'll eat quickly, then leave through the kitchen if possible. Eleanor nodded, her face pale beneath her bonnet. I'm sorry, I've put you in danger just as I feared. This confirms your story at least, Daniel replied, trying to inject some lightness into the situation. Not that I doubted you. If he's here, Thornton can't be far behind, Eleanor said, her voice tight with anxiety. He's methodical. He'll have men searching every town along the rail line. Their food arrived, simple plates of beef stew and bread, and they ate in tense silence. Daniel watched the entrance to the dining room continuously, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. They had nearly finished when the hotel doors opened, and the man from the street entered, scanning the dining room with predatory intensity. Daniel tensed, calculating the distance to the kitchen doors. Don't look up, he murmured to Eleanor. When I say now, walk calmly toward the back as if heading to the necessary room. I'll create a distraction. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, keeping her face down. The man was speaking to the hotel clerk now, showing him what appeared to be a photograph. The clerk shook his head, but gestured vaguely toward the dining room. Now, Daniel whispered, standing abruptly and catching the edge of the table with his knee, sending dishes crashing to the floor. My apologies, he called loudly, drawing all eyes to the commotion as Eleanor slipped away toward the back. How clumsy of me. The waiter hurried over, and Daniel made a show of helping clean up, positioning himself to block the view of Eleanor's retreating figure. From the corner of his eye, he saw the man at the entrance frowning at the disturbance, then continuing his scan of the room. Daniel paid for their meal with a generous tip for the broken dishes, then made his way toward the back, apparently following the path his cousin had taken. In the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, he found Eleanor pressed against the wall, trembling. He's looking for me, she whispered. Did he see you? I don't think he made the connection. Daniel took her elbow, guiding her through the kitchen despite the cook's protests. We need to leave town now. Is there another way to your ranch? Eleanor asked as they emerged into the alley behind the hotel. Daniel nodded. There's an old trader's trail that branches off about a mile south of town. It's rougher terrain but less visible from the main road. They skirted the buildings, using the back alleys to work their way toward the general store where they'd left the wagon. Daniel cursed under his breath when he spotted another well-dressed stranger talking to Martha Thompson at the store entrance. "They're already asking questions," he muttered. "We can't go back for the wagon." "What do we do?" Eleanor looked to him, her earlier composure cracking under the immediate threat. Daniel considered their options. "The livery stable is just down that side street. I know the owner. He'll let me take horses without questions if I leave a note promising payment. Won't they look there too? Eventually, but we only need a few minutes head start." They moved quickly to the livery, where Daniel found old Jim Peterson dozing in a chair. "Jim," Daniel called softly, waking the man, "need to borrow 2 horses. Emergency." Peterson blinked awake, taking in Eleanor's frightened expression and Daniel's tense posture. He'd known Daniel since boyhood and didn't waste time with questions. "Take the bay and the palomino in the back stalls," he said, reaching for a bridle. "Already saddled from the morning exercise. I'll return them tomorrow with payment," Daniel promised, helping him prepare the horses. "This about those fancy-dressed fellas asking questions in town." Peterson asked shrewdly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "The less you know, the better, Jim. Figured as much. Take the north exit, leads straight to Miller's Creek. You can follow that to avoid the main road." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding out the back of the livery, keeping to the trees that lined Miller's Creek. Daniel led the way, setting a brisk pace while avoiding a full gallop that might attract attention. Eleanor rode surprisingly well, maintaining her seat even as they navigated the rough terrain. When they'd put a few miles between themselves and town, Daniel pulled up beside a dense thicket of cottonwoods to rest the horses. "You ride like you were born to it," he commented, offering Eleanor his canteen. She took a small sip before handing it back. "My father raised horses in California before he died. I practically grew up in the saddle." "California," Daniel repeated. "Is that where you're from originally?" Eleanor nodded. "My father had a modest breeding operation near Sacramento. After he died last year, I sold it to pay his debts." Her expression clouded. "That's when I decided to head east to stay with my mother's sister in St. Louis, and met Thornton on the journey," Daniel concluded. "Yes." Eleanor looked away. "I should have been more cautious. Father always said I was too trusting." Daniel studied her profile, noting the way she held herself straight-backed despite her exhaustion and fear. "Trust isn't a weakness, Miss Kincaid. The world would be a darker place without it." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but discernment in whom to trust is a skill I clearly need to develop." They continued their journey, taking a circuitous route back to Sagebrush Ranch. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in spectacular golds and reds. Miguel met them at the corral, his expression grave. "Riders came by about an hour ago," he reported. 3 men well-dressed, asking questions about a young woman, said she was a runaway wife they'd been hired to find. Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did you tell them?" "That we hadn't seen anyone matching their description," Miguel replied. "They didn't believe me searched the bunkhouse and barn before I could stop them." "Did they enter the main house?" "No, Mrs. Willoughby stood on the porch with your shotgun. Said she'd shoot the first man who tried to enter without your permission." A hint of admiration colored Miguel's voice. They decided not to test her. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Daniel couldn't help a small smile. Mrs. Willoughby was a force of nature when roused. "They said they'd be back with the law," Miguel continued. "Claimed the woman was mentally unstable, dangerous to herself." Eleanor made a soft sound of distress. "It's their usual tactic, make it seem like I'm the criminal." Daniel helped her dismount, noting how she winced as her feet touched the ground. The day's ride had clearly aggravated her injuries. "Miguel, send someone to return these horses to Jim Peterson tomorrow, along with payment. Then gather the men. We need to prepare for visitors." As Miguel hurried off, Daniel turned to Eleanor. "Let's get you inside. We need to talk about what happens next." Mrs. Willoughby met them at the door, the shotgun still in her capable hands. Those men were nothing but trouble, she declared, ushering them inside. Had the look of predators, not lawmen. You were right to keep them out, Daniel assured her, guiding Eleanor to a chair. But they'll be back, possibly with someone wearing a badge. Bought and paid for, no doubt, Mrs. Willoughby sniffed, finally setting the shotgun aside. I'll fix you both some supper. You look done in. When the housekeeper had bustled off to the kitchen, Daniel sat across from Eleanor. We need to consider our options. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. I should leave tonight. They know I'm in the area now. It won't take long for them to connect me to you after our appearance in town. Running isn't the answer, Daniel said firmly. Even if you manage to avoid recapture, you'd be looking over your shoulder forever. We need to expose Thornton, not just escape him. How? He has connections, money, influence. So do I, Daniel countered. Not as much, perhaps, but enough to make some noise. The territorial governor is an honorable man. If we can get evidence of Thornton's operation to him directly, bypassing potentially corrupted local authorities. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. What kind of evidence? Names, dates, descriptions of his operation. Your testimony would be a start, but we'd need more. Daniel leaned forward. Did you see any other women while you were held captive? Overhear any conversations about previous merchandise? Eleanor closed her eyes, concentrating. There was a ledger. Thornton kept it with him, made entries when he thought I was asleep, and I heard him mention a shipment heading to Santa Fe in 3 days, something about the Chinaman being pleased with the quality. This information made Daniel's blood run cold. It sounded like Thornton was part of an organized trafficking ring that extended beyond Arizona territory. If we could get our hands on that ledger. Daniel began. Impossible, Eleanor interrupted. He guards it carefully. And we don't even know where he's based. The shack where he held you, could you recognize the area if you saw it again? Eleanor hesitated. Perhaps. It was in a canyon, I think, red rock formations. There was a creek nearby, I could hear it through the walls. Daniel's mind raced. There's a place that matches that description about 15 miles west of here. Old mining camp called Devil's Gulch, abandoned years ago when the silver played out. You think that's where he's operating from? It would make sense. Isolated but close enough to the railroad for convenience. Daniel stood, his decision made. Tomorrow I'll ride out to investigate alone, less chance of being spotted that way. No, Eleanor said sharply, rising to face him. I won't let you put yourself in danger because of me. If anyone goes, we go together. Daniel was taken aback by her vehemence. Miss Kincaid, I appreciate your courage, but nothing, Mr. Hayes. Her green eyes flashed with determination. This is my fight. I'm not hiding while you risk your life. Their standoff was interrupted by Mrs. Willoughby announcing dinner. Throughout the meal, Daniel found himself studying Eleanor with new appreciation. Despite everything she'd endured, her spirit remained unbroken, a rare quality he couldn't help but admire. Later that evening, after Eleanor had retired to her room, Daniel sat on the porch with Miguel, discussing security arrangements for the night. We'll keep 2 men on watch at all times, Miguel decided. Rotate every 4 hours. If anyone approaches, we'll know. Daniel nodded his agreement, staring out into the darkness. Miguel, how well do you remember Devil's Gulch? The foreman's eyebrows rose. Well enough. Nasty place, too many shadows, too many hiding spots. Why do you ask? Daniel explained his suspicions about Thornton's operation possibly being based there. I need to check it out tomorrow, discreetly. Miguel frowned. Not alone, surely. Miss Kincaid insists on accompanying me. The señorita has courage, Miguel acknowledged. But perhaps more sense would be better than more courage in this situation. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. She won't be dissuaded, and truthfully, we need her to identify the location if it's the right one. Then I come too, Miguel stated flatly. No arguments, Daniel. 3 sets of eyes are better than 2. Daniel knew better than to argue when Miguel used that tone. We'll leave at dawn. Tell only Will about where we're going. The fewer who know, the better. As Miguel departed to organize the night watches, Daniel remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. His thoughts turned to Eleanor, to the strange circumstances that had brought her into his life. In just 2 days, she had upended his carefully ordered existence, bringing danger and uncertainty, but also something else. Something he'd thought died with Sarah. An awakening, a reminder that life contained more than just survival and duty. It was too soon to name the feeling taking root in his chest, too dangerous, given their circumstances. But Daniel Hayes was not a man who ran from danger, even the danger of caring too much for a woman who had dropped unexpectedly into his life. Dawn broke with the muted pastels that presaged another scorching day. Daniel had slept little, his mind churning with plans and contingencies. He found Eleanor already in the kitchen, dressed in her new riding clothes and nursing a cup of coffee. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself a cup. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too much at stake." He studied her in the soft morning light. Despite the fading bruises, she looked stronger today, determined rather than frightened. "We can still change the plan," Daniel offered. "You could stay here while Miguel and I scout the gulch." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I need to do this, Mr. Hayes, for myself and for any other women Thornton has targeted." Something in her tone made Daniel suspect there was more to her story than she'd shared, but he didn't press. Everyone in the West carried secrets. Some wounds were better left undisturbed until they were ready to heal. Miguel joined them, bringing news that no suspicious activity had occurred during the night. After a quick breakfast, they prepared to leave with Mrs. Williff be packing provisions for the journey. "Be careful," the housekeeper admonished, pressing extra bandages into Daniel's saddlebag. "That gulch has an evil reputation." "We'll be back before dark," Daniel promised. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, taking a roundabout route to avoid potential watchers on the main trails. Eleanor rode between Daniel and Miguel, her posture easy in the saddle despite the gravity of their mission. "Tell me more about this Devil's Gulch," she requested as they picked their way through a rocky arroyo. "Used to be mining country," Daniel explained. "Silver strike in '68 brought a rush of prospectors, but it played out within a year." The camp emptied almost overnight when news of better strikes in Nevada spread. "Some say it's cursed," Miguel added. 3 miners died when a shaft collapsed. Then the foreman was found with his throat cut. After that, even those who'd found decent silver moved on. "Sounds like the perfect place for someone like Thornton," Eleanor observed grimly. They traveled in silence for the next few miles, alert for any sign of pursuit or surveillance. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the western foothills, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through some particularly treacherous passages. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon carved by centuries of flash floods. Weathered red rock formations stood like sentinels along its length, and the remnants of the mining camp were visible below a cluster of dilapidated wooden structures partially reclaimed by the desert. "Devil's Gulch," Daniel said quietly, surveying the scene through his field glasses. "Looks abandoned at first glance." Eleanor took the offered glasses, scanning the canyon with careful attention. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to the largest structure. "That building with the collapsed corner, that's where he held me. I recognize that unusual rock formation beside it." Daniel took the glasses back, focusing on the indicated building. It appeared deserted, but as he watched, a thin wisp of smoke curled from a makeshift chimney easily missed if you weren't looking carefully. "Someone's there," he confirmed. "And they're being careful not to advertise their presence." Miguel had been studying the approaches to the canyon. "There's a trail down the eastern face," he reported. "Rough going, but it would bring us in behind that big rock formation, out of sight from the buildings." Daniel considered their options. They needed confirmation that this was indeed Thornton's operation, preferably without alerting anyone to their presence. "We'll approach on foot," he decided. "Leave the horses secured here. Miguel, you stay with Miss Kincaid while I scout closer." "No," Eleanor interjected immediately. "I told you I'm not staying behind. And I won't risk your safety," Daniel countered. "If Thornton sees you, I'll stay out of sight," she promised. "But I need to confirm it's him, and I can identify the interior of that building if we get close enough." Miguel gave Daniel a sympathetic look that clearly said, "Good luck winning this argument." "Fine," Daniel conceded reluctantly. "But you follow my instructions exactly. No risks, no heroics." They secured the horses in a sheltered hollow, then began the treacherous descent into the canyon, moving from one patch of cover to the next. The sun beat down mercilessly, and by the time they reached the canyon floor, all three were sweating profusely despite the relatively early hour. Daniel led them on a circuitous route toward the cluster of buildings, using the natural rock formations for concealment. As they drew closer, signs of occupation became more evident: fresh bootprints in the dust, a water barrel that hadn't yet developed a layer of desert grime, the distant nickering of horses kept somewhere out of sight. They paused behind a large boulder about 50 yards from the main building. Daniel signaled for the others to stay put while he crept forward to the edge of their cover, studying the scene. The camp appeared quiet, but he counted 2 armed men positioned as lookouts, one on a rocky outcrop above the buildings, another casually leaning against a post near what appeared to be a makeshift corral. He returned to Eleanor and Miguel. At least 2 guards visible, no sign of Thornton yet. Eleanor's face was tense. The building where he held me had only one window on the east side, if we could get a look inside. Miguel pointed to a narrow wash that ran alongside the eastern perimeter of the camp. That might provide cover to approach the east side. But it's risky little protection if we're spotted. Daniel weighed their options. We need confirmation before we can take this to the authorities, otherwise it's just our word against his. I'll go, Eleanor said quietly. I'm smaller, less likely to be noticed. And I know exactly what I'm looking for. Absolutely not, Daniel responded immediately. It makes sense, she insisted. You and Miguel can create a distraction if necessary, just enough to let me get close to that window, confirm Thornton's presence, and see if there are other captives. Daniel wanted to refuse outright, but her logic was sound. Miguel could create a distraction from the west, while Daniel provided covering fire if needed. And Eleanor was indeed the least likely to be recognized at a distance. 10 minutes, he finally agreed, his voice tight with concern. You get to that window, take one look, and return immediately. If anything seems wrong, you abort, understood? Eleanor nodded solemnly. Understood. Daniel removed his revolver from its holster, checking that all chambers were loaded before handing it to her. Keep this with you. Last resort, only a gunshot will bring them all running. Eleanor accepted the weapon, her hands steady as she tucked it into the waistband of her skirt. They synchronized their timepieces, then Miguel moved off to circle around to the western approach. Daniel led Eleanor to the edge of the wash that would serve as her path to the building. Wait for Miguel's signal, it'll be a bird call, 3 short whistles, that means he's in position. Daniel found himself reluctant to let her go, a knot of fear tightening in his chest. Eleanor, be careful. It was the first time he'd used her given name without the formality of Miss Kincaid. She looked up at him, something soft and unreadable flickering in her eyes. I will, she promised. Then, unexpectedly, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. For luck, she whispered, before slipping into the wash and beginning her cautious approach. Daniel touched his cheek briefly, startled by the gesture and the warmth it sent through him. Then he forced himself to focus, moving to his own position where he could observe both Eleanor's progress and the lookouts. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eleanor moved like a shadow, keeping low in the shallow wash. When Miguel's signal came, 3 short whistles that could have been a desert bird. The guard on the outcrop turned westward, scanning for the source. Daniel watched as Eleanor reached the building, flattening herself against its weathered boards before inching toward the small, dirty window. She rose just enough to peer inside, then quickly ducked down again. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the shock that registered on her face. She began making her way back, still using the wash for cover when disaster struck. The second guard, apparently bored with his post, decided to stretch his legs, walking directly toward the eastern side of the building. Daniel tensed, calculating whether he could reach Eleanor before the guard spotted her. Before he could move, a commotion erupted from the western side of the camp. Miguel, realizing the danger, had escalated his distraction from bird calls to the sound of falling rocks. The guard hesitated, looking toward the noise, but then continued his path, which would take him directly to where Eleanor crouched in the wash, now trapped between the building and open ground. Daniel acted without further thought, rising from his position and calling out, "Hello, the camp." "Anyone there?" Both guards swung toward him, weapons raising. Daniel kept his own hands visible, affecting the manner of a lost traveler. "Sorry to trouble you fellas, but I seem to have taken a wrong turn, looking for the trail to Holbrook." The guard who had been approaching Eleanor's position changed direction, moving toward Daniel with suspicious eyes. "This is private property, mister. You'd best move on." "Happy to do so," Daniel replied amiably. "Just point me in the right direction." From the corner of his eye, he saw Eleanor using the distraction to slip away from the building, making her way back toward their meeting point. Relief flooded through him, though he kept his expression neutral. "Trail's back the way you came," the guard said gruffly. 2 miles east, then north." "Can't miss it." "Much obliged." Daniel touched the brim of his hat. "Sorry to disturb your mining operation, is it?" The guard's hand tightened on his rifle. "Something like that. Now move along before the boss takes offense to visitors." "The boss?" Daniel feigned innocent curiosity. "I might have some business to discuss if he's buying silver claims." "He ain't." The guard was losing patience. "Last warning, mister. Ride out now." Daniel nodded amicably and backed away. "No offense intended. Good day to you." He retreated the way he had come, maintaining a casual pace until he was out of the guard's sight. Then he hurried to the rendezvous point, where he found Eleanor waiting, her face pale. "Miguel?" he asked immediately. "Here," came the foreman's voice as he slipped out from behind a rock formation. "That was too close. Did they suspect anything?" "I don't think so." Daniel turned to Eleanor. "What did you see?" Her hands trembled slightly as she returned his revolver. "It's Thornton. He was inside, writing in that ledger I mentioned. And Daniel," she gripped his arm. "There are 2 women in there, young women bound to chairs just like I was." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we have what we need. Let's get back to the horses and ride for Prescott." The territorial marshal needs to hear this directly. They made their way back up the treacherous slope to where they'd left the horses, moving as quickly as caution allowed. Only when they were mounted and putting distance between themselves and Devil's Gulch did Daniel feel some of the tension leave his body. "Those poor women," Eleanor said as they rode. "We can't just leave them there while we travel all the way to Prescott." "The territorial marshal has deputies stationed in several towns," Daniel assured her. "Once we reach the telegraph office in Williams, we can alert them. They can assemble a proper force to raid the camp. Will they believe us?" Eleanor's doubt was evident in her voice. "They'll believe what I saw with my own eyes," Miguel interjected. "And your testimony, señorita, 3 witnesses is harder to dismiss than 1. They rode hard through the afternoon, taking a different route back than the one they'd used to approach Devil's Gulch. By sunset, they reached Sagebrush Ranch, where Will Cooper met them with troubling news. 3 riders came by again, he reported as they dismounted. This time they had a man wearing a marshal's badge with them. Showed papers claiming Miss Kincaid is a fugitive from California justice, something about stealing from her employer before fleeing. Daniel exchanged grim looks with Eleanor. False charges to give them legal cover to recapture her. "What did you tell them?" Miguel asked Will. "Same as before, that we hadn't seen anyone matching their description, but they searched the house this time, despite Mrs. Willoughby's objections." Will's expression turned apologetic. "The badge gave them authority she couldn't override." "Where are they now?" Daniel asked sharply. "Headed back to town, but they said they'd return with more men tomorrow. The marshal, if that's what he really is, said something about charging you with harboring a fugitive." Daniel made a quick decision. "Will, I need you to ride to Patterson's place on the North Range. Tell him I'm calling in that favor he owes me. We need his fastest horse and the use of his hunting cabin up in the hills." Will nodded, already moving toward the stable. "What are you planning?" Eleanor asked. "You and I are riding for Prescott tonight," Daniel explained. "Miguel will lead those men on a false trail tomorrow, make them think we fled south toward Tucson. And Mrs. Willoughby," Eleanor glanced toward the house. "She'll claim ignorance, say we never returned from our ride today. Miguel will back her story." Daniel turned to his foreman. "If we're not back in 3 days, or if you don't receive a telegram from us, assume something went wrong and get word to Marshal Jenkins in Denver. Use the code phrase we established." Miguel nodded gravely. Understood. God go with you both. Within the hour, Daniel and Eleanor had fresh horses, provisions, and were riding north under the cover of darkness. Patterson's hunting cabin lay in the mountains about 30 miles northwest, a primitive but secure shelter where they could rest before continuing to Prescott. They rode in silence for much of the journey, both lost in their own thoughts. The night air grew cooler as they climbed into higher elevations, and Daniel noticed Eleanor shivering slightly in her light jacket. "Here," he said, removing his coat and passing it to her without slowing their pace. "Can't have you catching a chill." Eleanor accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Thank you, not just for the coat, for everything. Most men would have ridden away when they found me by those tracks." "Most men, perhaps," Daniel acknowledged. "But my father raised me to believe that character is revealed in how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return." "Is that how you see me? Someone who can offer nothing?" There was a curious note in her voice. Daniel glanced at her, catching the silvery moonlight reflecting in her eyes. "That's not what I meant. You've already given more than you know." "What have I given you, Daniel Hayes?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Purpose," he finally said. "After Sarah died, I existed rather than lived. The ranch, the cattle, the daily work, it was all just motion without meaning. Then I found you beside those tracks, and suddenly—" "Suddenly what?" Eleanor prompted softly when he didn't continue. "Suddenly, I remembered what it feels like to care deeply about something beyond survival." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "I understand," she finally said. "After my father died, I felt adrift. That's why I was so easily taken in by Thornton's charm. He seemed to offer direction when I had none." "We're all vulnerable in different ways," Daniel observed. "The trick is finding someone who protects your vulnerabilities rather than exploits them." They reached Patterson's cabin shortly before midnight, a small, sturdy structure nestled among ponderosa pines. Daniel helped Eleanor dismount, noting how she winced as her feet touched the ground. "Your injuries still bothering you?" he asked with concern. "They're healing," she assured him, "just tender after a long day in the saddle." Inside, the cabin was basic but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Daniel busied himself lighting a fire while Eleanor explored the space. "You take the bed," he said, straightening from the now crackling flames. "I'll use my bedroll by the fire." Eleanor stood in the center of the room, suddenly looking uncertain. In the firelight, with her hair loosened from its pins and Daniel's coat still around her shoulders, she appeared both vulnerable and strangely powerful, a woman who had survived the worst and emerged unbroken. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why are you risking everything for me? Your ranch, your safety, your reputation, all for someone you barely know." He moved toward her, stopping just short of where propriety would demand. "I think I know the essentials of who you are, Eleanor Kincaid. I've seen your courage, your determination, your compassion for those women we can't yet help. The rest, your favorite color, whether you prefer coffee or tea in the morning, those are details that time reveals. But the core of you—" He shook his head slightly. "That was clear from the moment you opened your eyes beside those tracks and still had the will to fight." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And what if, after all this, we succeed in stopping Thornton but discover we have nothing in common beyond this crisis? What then?" "Then we'll have done something worthwhile together," Daniel answered honestly. "Not every connection is meant to last a lifetime, but that doesn't make it less valuable." She studied his face as if memorizing its contours. "And if it could last?" Daniel felt his heart quicken at the possibility contained in those 5 simple words. "Then I would count myself fortunate beyond measure." Eleanor stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I never thanked you properly," she murmured, "for saying I could rest, for promising me safety when I had none. You don't need to thank me for basic decency." "It wasn't basic, it was extraordinary." Her hand came up to rest against his cheek. "You're an extraordinary man, Daniel Hayes." Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, not the quick peck on the cheek from earlier, but a real kiss, gentle yet unmistakable in its intention. For a moment, Daniel remained perfectly still, surprised by her boldness. Then he responded, his arms encircling her waist with careful restraint, mindful of her still healing injuries. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Eleanor smiled up at him, the first genuine, uninhibited smile he'd seen from her. "I've been wanting to do that since you handed me your canteen beside those tracks," she admitted. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "While you were semi-conscious and terrified. Perhaps not exactly then," she laughed softly, "but soon after. When you promised me safety without demanding anything in return." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We should rest. We have a long ride ahead tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. "You're right, of course." As promised, Daniel made his bed near the fire while Eleanor took the cabin's only proper bed. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him as he replayed their kiss in his mind, considering what it might mean for their future if they had won beyond the current crisis. They rose before dawn, eating a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack before setting out for Prescott. The territorial capital lay another 40 miles northwest, a journey that would take them the better part of the day even with fresh horses. As they rode, Daniel outlined his plan. The territorial marshal, James Cooper, is based in Prescott. He reports directly to the governor. If Cooper is honest, and I believe he is, he'll have the authority to assemble a proper force to raid Devil's Gulch. And if he's one of Thornton's men, Eleanor asked. Then we go directly to Governor Fremont. I've met him once at a Cattlemen's Association meeting. He might remember me enough to grant an audience. The journey to Prescott was tense, both of them constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. They avoided the main roads and settlements, taking a more difficult but less traveled route through the highlands. They reached Prescott by mid-afternoon, the territorial capital sprawling before them in the valley, a proper city by Western standards, with brick buildings, boardwalks, and an air of permanence that most frontier towns lacked. Daniel led them to a small hotel on the outskirts, less likely to attract attention than the grander establishments near the government buildings. "Wait here," he instructed Eleanor after securing a room for her. "I'll go to the marshal's office alone first, assess whether Cooper can be trusted." "Be careful," she urged. "If Thornton has connections here." "I'll be discreet," he promised. "Lock your door and don't open it for anyone but me." The territorial marshal's office was located in a sturdy brick building near the courthouse. Daniel entered to find a harried-looking deputy behind a desk, sorting through wanted posters. "Help you?" the deputy asked without looking up. "I need to speak with Marshal Cooper," Daniel replied. "It's urgent. He's in a meeting with the governor." The deputy finally glanced up. "Could be a while. What's this about?" Daniel hesitated, unwilling to share details with someone he didn't know. "I have information about criminal activity in the territory, for the marshal's ears only." The deputy's expression turned suspicious. "Your name, Mr. Daniel Hayes." "I ranch near Holbrook." Recognition flickered in the deputy's eyes. "Hayes, we received a wire about you yesterday, something about harboring a fugitive from justice." Daniel's hand drifted closer to his holstered revolver. "That's part of what I need to discuss with the marshal." "There's been a misunderstanding." The office door opened, revealing a tall, distinguished man with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. The silver star on his chest identified him as Marshal Cooper. "I thought I heard visitors, Jenkins," the marshal said to his deputy. "Who's this?" "Daniel Hayes, sir, from Holbrook. Says he has information, but there's a wire." "I know about the wire," Cooper interrupted. "I'll handle this." He gestured for Daniel to follow him into his private office. Once the door closed, the marshal studied Daniel with shrewd eyes. "You've got yourself in a heap of trouble, Mr. Hayes. There's a federal warrant circulating for your arrest for interfering with lawful justice." "There's nothing lawful about it," Daniel countered. "The warrant is based on false allegations meant to recapture a woman who escaped from human traffickers." Cooper's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation. You have evidence?" "Eyewitness testimony. Mine, the woman's, and my foreman's. We found their operation at Devil's Gulch yesterday, at least 2 women being held captive, guarded by armed men. The leader is a man named Lawrence Thornton." The marshal leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Thornton, wealthy businessman from Denver." Daniel tensed, ready to bolt if Cooper showed signs of being in Thornton's pocket. That's what he claims to be. In reality, he's kidnapping women for sale. Cooper was silent for a long moment, then abruptly opened a drawer and removed a file. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Margaret Wilson disappeared from a train bound for Santa Fe. Her father is a Colorado state senator. 2 weeks before that, Louisa Gardner vanished under similar circumstances, both educated young women traveling alone. He fixed Daniel with an intense stare. We've been investigating, but had no leads on who was behind the disappearances. Relief washed through Daniel. The woman I'm protecting, Eleanor Kincaid, escaped from Thornton. She can identify him, describe his operation. And there are 2 more women at Devil's Gulch right now who need immediate rescue. Cooper stood. Where is Miss Kincaid now? Safe, Daniel said, still cautious. I need to be certain of your position before revealing her location. The marshal smiled grimly. Smart man. Let me be clear then. Human trafficking is an abomination I won't tolerate in my territory. If what you say is true, I'll have Thornton in chains before the week is out. He removed his badge, placing it on the desk between them. On my honor as a lawman and a Christian, Mr. Hayes. I am not in anyone's pocket. Daniel studied the man's face, finding nothing but sincerity and righteous anger. She's at the Pinewood Hotel on the eastern edge of town, room 8. Let's go, Cooper said, replacing his badge. I'll bring my deputy and 2 trusted men. If her story corroborates yours, we'll plan an immediate raid on Devil's Gulch. Within the hour, Eleanor was seated in the marshal's office, recounting her ordeal to Cooper and his deputy while Daniel stood protectively nearby. She spoke with remarkable composure, detailing Thornton's operation with clarity and precision. And you're certain the women you saw yesterday were still alive? Cooper asked gravely. Eleanor nodded. Yes, frightened, bound, but alive. Thornton mentioned a shipment leaving for Santa Fe in 3 days. I believe he meant those women. Cooper exchanged looks with his deputy. That gives us a narrow window. I'll need to organize a force, approach from multiple directions to prevent any chance of escape. What about the marshal who came to my ranch with Thornton's men? Daniel asked. He was wearing a federal badge. Cooper's expression darkened. Describe him. Daniel did so, and the territorial marshal cursed under his breath. Bradford. He's not federal, he's a county deputy from over in Yavapai. Must be on Thornton's payroll. I'll deal with him after we secure Devil's Gulch. Plans were made quickly. Cooper would assemble a force of 15 men deputies and trusted volunteers to raid the gulch at dawn the next day. Daniel insisted on being part of the operation, and after brief resistance, Cooper agreed. What about me? Eleanor asked. I want to help. You've done your part, Cooper assured her. The most important thing now is keeping you safe until Thornton is captured. She can stay at the governor's mansion, a new voice suggested from the doorway. They turned to find a distinguished older man observing their conversation. Governor John Fremont entered the office, nodding acknowledgement to those present. I couldn't help overhearing portions of your discussion, he explained. Human trafficking in my territory is a matter of grave concern. Miss Kincaid would be well protected at the mansion while you gentlemen conduct your raid. Eleanor looked uncertain. Your Excellency, I appreciate the offer, but no safer place in the territory, Cooper interjected. The governor's security detail is beyond reproach. Daniel met Eleanor's eyes, seeing her reluctance to be separated from him. It's just for a day, he said softly, until this is over. She finally nodded her agreement. Very well, thank you, Governor. As arrangements were finalized, Daniel found a moment alone with Eleanor before she departed for the governor's residence. I don't like being left behind, she admitted, her hands twisting together anxiously. What if something goes wrong? Daniel took her hands in his, stilling their nervous movement. Then you'll be safe, which is what matters most to me. You matter to me, she countered, her green eyes intense. Please be careful, Daniel. Thornton is dangerous, desperate men often are. I've faced desperate men before. He squeezed her hands gently. When this is over, we'll have time to figure out whatever this is between us without fear or pressure. A soft smile touched her lips. I'd like that. So would I. He bent to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. Rest now, as I promised when I found you. Tomorrow will bring a new beginning. The raid on Devil's Gulch began in the gray half-light before dawn. Marshal Cooper had divided his force into 3 groups, one to approach from the east, another from the west, and a smaller team to circle behind and cut off the narrow southern exit from the canyon. Daniel rode with Cooper in the eastern contingent, his heart pounding with a combination of nervousness and determination, as they approached the same ridge where he, Eleanor, and Miguel had observed the camp just 2 days earlier. "Remember," Cooper instructed his men in a hushed voice, "our priority is rescuing the captives. Thornton is to be taken alive if possible. He needs to stand trial, and we need his testimony to dismantle the entire network." The men nodded their understanding. Most were experienced lawmen, though a few, like Daniel, were civilians with personal stakes in the outcome. At Cooper's signal, they began their descent into the canyon. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout of alarm rose from the camp below. Someone had spotted them. "Move in." Cooper ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. Daniel dug his heels into his mount's flanks, charging down the slope with the others. Gunfire erupted from the camp, the guards responding to the threat with immediate violence. The raiding party returned fire as they closed the distance, forcing the guards to seek cover rather than maintain accurate aim. Daniel saw one of the guards fall, another retreating toward the main building where Eleanor had spotted Thornton and his captives. They reached the canyon floor in a cloud of dust and gunfire. Daniel dismounted behind a large boulder, drawing his Winchester rifle from its scabbard as he sought a clear view of the main building. "Hayes," Cooper called from nearby. "Circle left with Peterson, secure that back entrance." "Don't let anyone escape with the women," Daniel nodded, signaling to Deputy Peterson. They moved in a wide arc, using the scattered rocks and abandoned equipment for cover as they worked their way toward the rear of the structure. More gunfire erupted from the western approach, the second team engaging with defenders on that side. The confusion worked to Daniel and Peterson's advantage, allowing them to reach the small back door undetected. Daniel positioned himself beside the entrance, rifle ready, as Peterson prepared to breach the door. On a silent count of 3, Peterson kicked it open, and Daniel surged inside, prepared for resistance. The back room was empty except for abandoned bedrolls and personal effects, the guards' quarters, apparently. A narrow hallway led toward the front of the building, where raised voices could be heard over the sporadic gunfire outside. Daniel recognized one of those voices immediately, the cultured tones of Lawrence Thornton, issuing urgent commands. "Get them into the wagon. Use the tunnel if you have to. They're worth a fortune. I won't lose them now." Daniel signaled Peterson to follow as he moved carefully down the hallway. They reached a partially open door, through which Daniel could see a portion of the main room. 2 young women, bound and gagged, were being roughly handled by one of Thornton's men, while another stood guard at the front entrance. Thornton himself was visible only in profile, a tall, well-dressed man with graying temples, exactly as Eleanor had described. He was hurriedly gathering papers from a desk, stuffing them into a leather satchel. Daniel caught Peterson's eye, indicating their targets with hand signals. The deputy nodded his understanding. On Daniel's mark, they burst through the door. "Federal marshals. Everyone freeze," Peterson shouted, his revolver trained on the man holding the women. Daniel kept his rifle aimed at Thornton, who had whirled at their entrance, his hand dropping toward a holstered pistol. "Don't," Daniel warned. "It's over, Thornton." Recognition flashed in the trafficker's eyes. "Hayes," he spat. "The rancher should have known. Where's my property?" "Where's the Kincaid woman?" Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger at Thornton's reference to Eleanor as property, but he controlled his anger. "Safe from you. Forever." The standoff lasted only moments before being broken by the guard at the front entrance, who swung his weapon toward the newcomers. Peterson fired first, dropping the man with a clean shot to the shoulder. In the same instant, Thornton drew his pistol with surprising speed. Daniel reacted instinctively, firing as he dove for cover. His shot struck Thornton in the side, causing the man to stumble but not fall. Thornton returned fire, his bullet splintering the wooden doorframe inches from Daniel's head. The remaining guard, seeing his employer wounded, made a break for a trapdoor in the corner that presumably led to the tunnel Thornton had mentioned. Peterson's second shot caught him in the leg, sending him crashing to the floor. Thornton used the distraction to make his own attempt at escape, limping rapidly toward a side door while still clutching his satchel of papers. Daniel rolled to his feet, pursuing without hesitation. The side door opened onto a small corral where several horses were tethered. Thornton was trying to mount one, his wounded side making the effort clumsy and slow. Daniel reached him just as he managed to pull himself into the saddle. "It's finished, Thornton," Daniel declared, aiming his rifle. "Dismount, or I'll put a bullet in your other side." The trafficker's handsome face contorted with fury and pain. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, rancher. I have friends in territorial government in Washington itself. I'll be free within a week, and then I'll find her and you again." "Not this time," Daniel replied steadily. "The governor himself is involved now. Those women you've been selling, one was a senator's daughter. There's nowhere left for you to hide." Something shifted in Thornton's expression, the realization that his operation had truly collapsed. With a snarl of defiance, he drew his pistol again, aiming not at Daniel but at the satchel. "If I burn alone," he growled, clearly intending to destroy the evidence that might implicate his associates. Daniel's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him from the saddle before he could fire. The satchel fell to the dust as Thornton collapsed, cursing through gritted teeth. By now, Marshal Cooper and several deputies had converged on the corral, drawn by the gunfire. Cooper surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. "Good work, Hayes," he commended, signaling 2 deputies to secure the wounded Thornton. "Did you secure the ledger?" Daniel retrieved the fallen satchel, opening it to reveal account books and correspondence. "All here, it seems." "Plenty of evidence," Cooper nodded. "The women are safe, both the ones here and the 2 we found in a concealed room. 4 lives saved today." He clasped Daniel's shoulder. "Miss Kincaid will be pleased." The aftermath of the raid kept Daniel at Devil's Gulch for several hours. Statements were taken, evidence catalogued, prisoners secured for transport. The rescued women, traumatized but unharmed beyond bruising from their bonds, were treated with gentle care by the doctor Cooper had wisely brought along. It was mid-afternoon before Daniel could break away, riding hard for Prescott with Marshal Cooper's permission to inform Eleanor of their success. His mind raced ahead to their reunion, to the conversation they would finally be able to have without the shadow of Thornton looming over them. At the governor's mansion, he was received with immediate attention once he identified himself. A servant led him to a sunny parlor where Eleanor waited, pacing nervously. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Daniel," she rushed forward, hesitating just short of embracing him publicly. "You're all right. What happened?" "Thornton's captured, along with his men," Daniel reported. 4 women rescued, including the 2 you saw. And we secured his records, names, dates, connections. The entire operation will be dismantled." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "It's really over." "Completely." He wanted to take her hands to hold her, but was acutely aware of the formal setting. "Marshal Cooper sends his gratitude for your courage in coming forward, and your role in all this," she asked softly. "I did what anyone would have done." Eleanor shook her head. "Not anyone." "Only you." She glanced toward the door, where a servant hovered discreetly. "Can we speak privately? The governor provided me with a small garden for exercise." Daniel followed her through French doors into a walled garden vibrant with late summer blooms. Once they were shielded from view by a large magnolia tree, Eleanor finally stepped into his arms, her composure breaking as she clung to him. "I was so afraid," she whispered against his chest, when the hours passed with no word. Daniel held her gently, one hand stroking her hair. "I promised I'd return." She looked up at him, tears leaving silvery tracks on her cheeks. What happens now? It was the question that had occupied his thoughts throughout the long ride from Devil's Gulch. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether you still want to continue to St. Louis as you originally planned, or if perhaps—" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Perhaps what, Daniel Hayes?" He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Perhaps you might consider staying in Arizona territory, at Sagebrush Ranch, with me." Her eyes widened. "Are you asking me to not marriage?" he clarified quickly. "Not yet. That would be presumptuous after knowing each other less than a week, regardless of what we've faced together." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking for time to learn if what we feel for each other can grow into something lasting." A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. "Time," she repeated. "I think I'd like that very much." "It won't be easy," Daniel warned. "Ranch life is hard, isolated. And once this story spreads, there will be curiosity, questions. People may not understand why you chose to stay." "Let them wonder," Eleanor said firmly. "I've spent too much of my life worrying about what others think. Besides," her smile turned mischievous, "I grew up on a horse farm, remember?" "I'm not afraid of hard work." Daniel laughed, a feeling of lightness spreading through him that he hadn't experienced in years. "Mrs. Willoughby will be pleased. She's been trying to civilize me since Sarah died." "I'm not sure I'm the civilizing influence she might hope for," Eleanor cautioned. "I've been told I'm rather stubborn, so I've noticed." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's one of the things I admire about you." 3 days later, with Thornton securely imprisoned awaiting trial and the rescued women safely reunited with their families, Daniel and Eleanor began the journey back to Sagebrush Ranch. The territorial marshal had formally cleared Daniel of all charges, and Governor Fremont had personally thanked them for their role in exposing the trafficking operation. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch, Daniel reined his horse to a stop, allowing Eleanor to take in the view of what might become her home. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way the afternoon sun gilded the ranch buildings and the surrounding landscape. "Peaceful." "It can be," Daniel agreed. "Other times, it's the hardest place in the world: droughts, storms, predators, both animal and human." Eleanor turned to him with a confident smile. "Then we'll face those challenges together, just as we did with Thornton." As they rode down toward the ranch, Daniel found himself remembering that fateful day when he'd followed an inexplicable impulse to ride along the railroad tracks. He'd found Eleanor bruised and barefoot beside those tracks, not knowing that in saving her, he was also saving himself from the lonely existence he'd accepted as his fate after Sarah's death. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Daniel smiled at her, marveling at how natural it felt to have her riding beside him. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most important journeys begin with an unexpected detour and end with a promise of rest," Eleanor added softly, reaching across to take his hand. Together, they rode toward home, and the future they would build, a future neither could have imagined, when fate first brought them together beside those sun-baked railroad tracks in the wild Arizona territory. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on Sagebrush Ranch, just as it had on that fateful day in 1878. But much had changed in the intervening years, most notably the addition of a wraparound porch to the main house and the sound of children's laughter that now frequently filled the air. Daniel Hayes stood on that porch, watching as his wife of 4 years knelt in her vegetable garden, patiently showing their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah, how to tell carrots from weeds. Their 1-year-old son, James, napped in a shaded basket nearby, his tiny face peaceful in slumber. Eleanor Hayes had blossomed in the years since her ordeal. The frightened, injured woman Daniel had found beside the tracks had transformed into a confident rancher's wife, respected throughout the county for her intelligence and compassion. Together, they had expanded Sagebrush Ranch into one of the most prosperous operations in the territory, with Daniel managing the cattle while Eleanor applied her knowledge of horses to establish a successful breeding program. Lawrence Thornton had faced justice, his trial becoming one of the most sensational in territorial history. Eleanor's testimony, along with that of the other rescued women, had ensured his conviction. He now served a life sentence in Yuma Territorial Prison, his network of accomplices similarly imprisoned or fled beyond U.S. borders. Daniel smiled as little Sarah squealed with delight at successfully pulling a carrot from the rich soil. Eleanor looked up, catching his eye across the yard, her face lighting with the smile that still made his heart skip a beat after all these years. Life wasn't perfect. There had been challenges, drought years, cattle disease, the usual dangers of frontier life. Eleanor had suffered a miscarriage between Sarah and James, a loss that had tested their strength individually and as a couple. But through it all, they had kept the promise made that day beside the railroad tracks that together, they would find rest and safety in each other's arms, come what may. As Eleanor gathered their daughter and the freshly harvested vegetables to return to the house, Daniel descended the porch steps to meet them, lifting Sarah into his arms and placing a gentle kiss on his wife's forehead. Happy? He asked simply, a question that had become something of a ritual between them. Eleanor's green eyes, as striking now as the day he'd first seen them flutter open beside those tracks, met his with unwavering certainty. More than I ever dreamed possible, she answered, reaching up to trace the smile lines that had deepened around his eyes over the years. All because a certain cowboy promised I could rest. Daniel gathered his family close, marveling at how a single moment of compassion had changed the course of so many lives. Best promise I ever made, he murmured against her hair, and one I intend to keep for all our days. Together, they walked toward the house that had become a home in the truest sense, a sanctuary of love built from the ashes of fear, a testament to the healing power of trust when placed in worthy hands. The Wild West had tried to break them both in different ways, but in finding each other, they had discovered a strength greater than any challenge the frontier could present. And that, Daniel thought as he watched Eleanor settle their daughter at the kitchen table while James continued to sleep peacefully, was the greatest treasure any man could hope to find, even in a land where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the discovery of a silver vein. Some things once found were beyond price. Some promises once made sustained a lifetime of happiness. And some journeys, though beginning in pain and fear, led to destinations more beautiful than any traveler could imagine at the outset. For Daniel and Eleanor Hayes, that journey had begun beside sun-baked railroad tracks in the Arizona Territory of 1878 with 7 simple words that had changed everything. You'll rest now, I promise. A promise kept, a life built, a love that had only grown stronger with each passing season. In the end, what more could anyone ask of this wild, beautiful, unforgiving land they called home?